Hello. Hello there. Welcome to our Lunch and Learn on disability representation on and off screen, which is the finale of our ethical set series. I'm Megan Ross, Seed&Spark's head of creator success, and I want to introduce and thank today's ASL interpreter from the sign language company, Gabe Gomez, who will be joining us shortly for helping us make this event more accessible. Before we begin, we'd first like to acknowledge the land we are all on is occupied territory. Please check the YouTube live comments feed for a link to a First Nations COVID relief fund and an amazing app that will tell you exactly whose land you are currently watching from, or in the video description if you're watching this as a VOD. I am coming to you from the land originally belonging to Jamanos, Tonkawa, Coahuitecan, and Comanche. Along with our event co-host RespectAbility, who I'll introduce shortly, we have a few other event partners to thank today, and Danny will share their links in the chat. In the Cut LA produces multiple online events per month, carefully curated to bring value to budding Black creatives and other marginalized communities. They've created a space where you can learn from real industry professionals and receive actionable, thoughtful advice on how to advance your career. Film Shop is a nonprofit collective of independent filmmakers committed to developing new work through peer support and collaboration. Chapters in Brooklyn, Manhattan, Los Angeles, and New Orleans meet weekly to workshop projects, offer constructive criticism, and incubate new ideas. The School of Film and TV at Loyola Marymount University is one of the top 10 film schools in the country. Located in Los Angeles, the heart of the media and entertainment industry, SFTV is known for its robust hands-on training, exceptional liberal arts education, and highly engaged community. The Gotham provides various levels of membership to creators in the film and media industry, filmmakers, screenwriters, podcasters, and more, with the goal of providing tangible connections, learnings, and skills to apply to their projects and careers. Looking back at this year's Ethical Set series, we've discussed topics from environmental sustainability for productions to the ins and outs of inclusion writers in an effort to support independent creators in building welcoming, inclusive, and diverse film sets. We are all learning and growing, and as we make strides in diversity and inclusion, we must remember, even with the best intentions, missteps can happen. And when that happens, it's time to acknowledge, reflect, and change. We aim to grow and take steps to improve in our own inclusive practices at Seed&Spark, and we hope that you do too. So thank you all for caring about these topics and joining us in this process of learning and improving. We want to thank RespectAbility for all their work in the disability community and for partnering with us on this event. And on that note, please welcome RespectAbility's Vice President Communications, Lauren Applebaum.
Thank you, Megan, for that lovely introduction. I'm sharing a description of myself for anyone who may not be able to see me. I am a white woman with long brown hair and glasses, wearing a navy blue shirt, standing in front of a green wall. My pronouns are she and her, and I'm speaking from the land of the Piscataway. I was asked to talk a little bit about RespectAbility, so I'm going to do that first. We were founded 9 years ago with the goal of increasing employment opportunities for people of all types of disabilities who desire the opportunity to work. We are a cross-disability organization, including both visible and non-visible disabilities. I myself have a slightly more rare disability called reflex sympathetic dystrophy, which affects my sympathetic nervous system in my right arm and right leg. As our new strategic plan, which we released late this summer, outlines, we have 4 pillars of our work, with entertainment and news media having been one since the beginning. What we see on screen increases how we think and feel in the real life. I am especially proud of our pipeline training programs, including our award-winning lab for disabled professionals working behind the camera, opening more doors and directly leading to employment opportunities. Many of these alumni also have joined our entertainment media consulting team. In our consulting work, we advise major entertainment studios on how to portray disability accurately and intersectionally. These entertainment media professionals, many of whom are writers, now have paying opportunities as consultants on these projects while they may be in between writing and other jobs within the entertainment industry. I'd like to share that 100% of these consultants are disabled themselves and working within the entertainment industry. 70% identify as being a woman or non-binary, and 52% identify as being a person of color. Consultants are matched with projects not only by lived disability experience, but also on cultural sensitivities. Now, we know that Seed&Spark is deeply committed to diversity and equity, and they have generously given us space to talk on this topic. While we acknowledge that we have not always lived up to our aspirations of inclusion, we are committed to transparency and accountability in a continual process of both learning and improvement. I personally appreciate Seed&Spark reaching out to have a conversation with us and really take pride in open dialogue to advance change. As we shared directly with this team, we have been working hard to deepen our commitments, providing trainings in anti-racism, microaggressions, and disability justice for all staff members, and expanding the inclusiveness of our work. RespectAbility is committed to transformational societal and organizational change that drives measurable improvements to access and equity. Our commitments, which we've just begun to outline, are in our publicly disclosed strategic plan, which is available on our website, and I believe a link to that is being dropped in right now. Now I'd really like to turn this back to Megan, who will introduce the panel, which is moderated by my colleague Tatiana Lee, who was the second person brought onto this team as we began to increase our footprint in 2019. The panelists also happen to be alumni of our lab, and I am excited that you will have the opportunity to learn from them about all the ways they are truly making a difference, not only getting through the door themselves, but actively holding the door open for others. Thank you, Megan.
Thank you so much for that, Lauren. Definitely check out the link that Danny will share to learn more about the work that they're doing. And now I'd like to introduce our wonderful moderator for today's panel, who will then introduce the panelists. Tatiana Lee is the voice behind the Accessible Hollywood brand, highlighting her journey as an actress, model, and lifestyle influencer born with spina bifida. She has appeared in award-winning films and modeling campaigns for Target, Zappos, Apple, and more. She is a sought-after speaker in the entertainment and media space and volunteers her time as a disability advocate for Women of Color Unite. Currently working at RespectAbility, Lee is the head consultant on various TV and film projects and conducts training for studios and production companies, including NBC Universal, Netflix, and the Walt Disney Company. Please welcome Tatiana.
Thank you, Megan, so much for that beautiful introduction. My name is Tatiana Lee, and I'm the Senior Associate of Entertainment and Media at RespectAbility. I'm a brown-skinned disabled Black woman with kinky curly hair and a puff, wearing glasses and a black top with a gold necklace. My pronouns are she and her, and I occupy the land of the Tongva people. Thank you so much for taking the time today to join us for this panel discussion. Everyone on this panel today has one thing in common, or a couple things in common. We identify as disabled and we work in the entertainment industry, and yet our identities and experiences are not yet fully and authentically reflected on our TV and movie screens. During this panel, we will talk about the importance of disability representation on and off screen. First, we have Diana Elizabeth Jordan, who is an award-winning actor, solo artist, theater, and filmmaker, disability influencer, and artist educator. She has been featured in film, theater, and TV, including CBS's SWAT. Ms. Jordan is the founder of Dreaming Big on a Swing Entertainment and the edutainment production company, the Rainbow Butterfly Cafe. Whether working in front of the stage or off, Diana is committed to normalizing the disability experience through her work as an artist. Next is Kaya. Kaya is a filmmaker, consultant, educator, producer, and production accessibility coordinator, and a media industry activist. As a person with perennial neuropathic UCTD, excuse me, I was tongue-tied, they have a unique ability to connect to disability intersections from spoonie chronic illness and neurodiversity to mobility, vision, and nonverbal communication. Their consulting experience includes indie features, shorts, web series, and commercial projects, accessible deliverables, and social media via RespectAbility and their production company, Indivisible Entertainment. Kaya has spoken at the Met, MoMA, S&P Global, Real Abilities New York, and many more. Kaya is a member of RespectAbility's National Speakers Bureau and a 2021 RespectAbility Entertainment and Media Fellow. As a 2020 Dance NYC Disability and Social Justice Fellow, they are currently working in LA on an unannounced family show with a major streamer. I want to welcome both of you. Thank you. I also want to take the time for you both to introduce yourselves in your own way and describing yourselves for our blind and low vision audience.
Hi everyone, I'm Diana Elizabeth Jordan. I'm a brown-skinned woman. I have cerebral palsy. I'm wearing a black floral dress, and my background is just my very cluttery living room office. And I come to you from the occupied land of the Gabrielino Tongva nations.
Hello, I'm Kaya Amara. My pronouns are they and she. I'm a white woman with sort of slightly longer than shoulder length brown hair, wearing a green jacket and sitting in a purposely very nondescript white room as I'm on set. I'm occupying Tongva land. And yes, my disability of peripheral neuropathic unspecified connective tissue disease, which is a lovely long name for essentially saying I have a chronic illness.
Thank you so much for introducing yourself. So let's dive into it. I have a bunch of questions that I want to ask. We're going to dive right into it, especially with the fact that Kaya, you are in the middle of production right now, which is so fun and exciting. I can't wait to see what comes out of this project. So to both of you, what are some of the most common changes you've had to suggest when it comes to being on various productions?
Kay, do you want to go? I think it depends on the production. Because there are days I walk unassisted, so there are a lot of times when I don't necessarily need accommodations. But there have been times, especially when I've done stage, where, for example, when I was in graduate school, I got my master's degree in theater and acting in 2001. They built a set that was where we had to climb out of the ground and push ourselves up on our arms to crawl out of the hole. And that wasn't possible for me to do. So they built the set so that I didn't have to push up. And sometimes even with shoes. I've gone on sets and they bring me these heels and I'm like, I don't know who's gonna walk in them, but it's not gonna be me. Because, so I think for me, those little things may not seem like that's not a big deal, but it is a big deal because in order for me to do my job, I need to be comfortable. So sometimes it might be in terms of a costume, or it might be in terms of something that may not seem like it's an issue, but it becomes an issue for me because if I don't feel safe, I want to focus on my job as an actor, not whether or not I'm going to fall flat on my face walking on set.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the point that you made about these are the things that I need to be able to do my job. And you think about how some A-listers have like on their writer all these different recommendations of things that they need. And it's like it's given to them like no problem. But then as a disabled person, it's like
Right.
specific accommodations and things you need sometimes becomes a struggle. And it's like, how are my needs any different than someone else's?
Right, and you feel, I think sometimes you feel afraid to ask because you don't want to, but again, I think that really speaks to how insidious ableism is when we don't think about it because we think, well, everyone ought to be able to wear this or everyone ought to be able to do this. And we don't realize that really comes, even in fashion, from a very ableist perspective.
Yeah, I
Go
just
ahead,
wanted to
Kaya.
add, going off of what you said about like it's the things that like aren't necessarily that complicated, but they're the thing that you're like, this is what allows me to do my job. And like coming from a more production background, and like one of the things that we really try and do is make sure that we're always having a conversation about like, here are the things we can do really easily, and we can do them now, and we can offer them to everybody, which is stuff like, let's turn the captions on in our Zoom meeting, and let's make sure that the fire lane stays clear, which we should be doing regardless, but sometimes there's a light there, and then somebody who's a mobility aid user can't get through. And things like we do our call sheets and things. Like I do an accessible version of call sheets that has our dyslexia safe font and is in dark mode, which is that dark background with a lighter. So that's great for anybody who has chronic migraines or headaches of any kind. And all of these things are things that benefit everybody, not just people with disabilities. So yes, we're thinking upfront about people who have disabilities and somebody who may have disclosed that they have dyslexia, and we can immediately offer this dyslexia safe font and be like, great, it was free, it was easy, here we go, why are we complicating it, let's just do it. As well as saying like, oh, here's a dark mode script, cool, you have chronic migraines and you identify that as a disability, here's something for you. Cool, PA who has gotten 4 hours of sleep and is getting a headache, you can also use this, and like you don't need to identify as disabled. And just like really reminding people that like all this accessibility stuff, yes, obviously we're prioritizing disabled people in the space, that like it serves everybody. So there's absolutely no reason not to utilize all of these tools that we have, because we have so many.
If you're offering to give a script in a larger font, so again, that's easily done on a computer. To give it 24 or 48, which honestly helps everybody regardless.
Exactly. So yeah, so what I'm hearing is accessibility accommodations are not that hard. It's a simple conversation most of the time, and something that can be done as a click of a button and a quick move of something. And not only that, it does not only benefit folks with disabilities, but also supports everyone to just create an inclusive environment. That's what I'm hearing, right?
Yeah. And I think it's important for producers to kind of the stability to be able to offer that. I mean, I'm starting to do some to say, when you're doing your initial hiring or whatever, are there accommodations that you need? Therefore, if someone needs them, they feel less hesitant to ask, because it starts at the top. So the producer says, what do you need to do your job, and ask that question. It makes it much easier for the talent or crew to feel comfortable asking for it.
Yeah, exactly. So let's go to our next one. And I'll pose this to both of you, but I definitely want to hear Diane's thoughts, because I know her and I have had plenty of conversations about this. But what is the intrinsic value of having a disabled person play a disabled character? And what damage is done when it does not happen?
Oh, that's like my favorite question. Well, it really is. Yeah, you win the prize. Ding, ding, ding. I always put it this way. There was a time when blackface, there was acceptable. It is now not. So if you were going to do Martin Luther King, you would not even consider casting an actor who was not African American. And that there was this rumor going around years ago that they were going to do a film, and it wasn't a rumor, it was true, get Julia Roberts to play Harriet Tubman. That never happened. I know, yeah, right? Kind of like, what the heck? Yeah, so that's ridiculous. Last year, when after the tragic murder of George Floyd, when we had this awakening, and actors saying, I'm not going to play trans, I'm not trans, Kristen Bell said, I'm not going to play this biracial character that should be played by a person of color. We've had those awakenings. So why is it to be the thing with the disability? To me, it's like, you're not being inclusive if you're still erasing the authentic representation of somebody with a disability. So someone may say, well, it's a wonderful challenge for me or whatever, but it's a challenge for me as an actor too. I mean, just because it's disability specific doesn't mean that the role itself and the storyline may not be challenging for me emotionally, physically, whatever, but it is because we don't, still only when it comes to disability do we have these conversations. We seem to move forward with the trans community and the LGBT community, and we should. I'm not saying that that's a very positive, but why aren't we doing that with the intersections of disability that intersects with every other marginalized group? So that's it. I mean, we wouldn't do it in any other situation. So why shouldn't it even be a conversation when it comes to disability? It
Yeah.
is, but I don't think it should be.
And then adding on the fact that there's folks out there like yourself who are amazing actors, and, like myself and so many others who most of the time don't even get the chance to audition until it's a role that actually is asking for someone with a disability. It's very rare. And I know you've probably had that experience too, of it's very rare to be asked to audition for something when it has a disability isn't even listed, or it has nothing to do with it. It's so rare, right?
I mean, that is why when I booked SWAT, it meant so much to me, because it wasn't written for someone with a disability. It was just someone in the window staring at Shemar Moore, which I had to do. I had to stay on set all day and look at Shemar Moore. It was hard, but sometimes you have to sacrifice for your art.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Kaya, do you have anything to add to this topic?
I think the only thing I want to add is that I saw a panel on a film called The Witch Hunters like 2 years ago at Real Abilities Film Fest. And one of the things that the director talked about, the lead is a young boy with CP, and it has like CP things, but it's mostly sort of like about family and this friend of his, which of course is great because it's not inherently about his disability. But the director essentially said, like, this actor brought to me things about his personal experience with CP that, like, I wouldn't have thought of for this. And I feel like that's why we hire the actors that we hire, because we see their talent and we see the things that they can bring to a role that will, enhance the script that we've written and enhance the project that we're making. So when you cast inauthentically, you're immediately stripping all of that from your film. You're stripping all of the possibility that's there from the real lived experience. That, again, if you cast somebody authentically, whatever their intersections may be, all of their intersections, you just keep building on that authentic voice to be able to really, enlighten an audience and enlighten, your crew, your production team about what this experience really is. And I think, at least for me, again, I always, Diana, with your edutainment company, that, I've sort of started using that word too. When we were on the last panel, I was like, edutainment company is great. There's always this sort of like education that we're doing here as we're like working to fight the invisibility of disability that has been, so forced upon us for so many years, that, now we're saying, hey, this is disability. It's a community. We want to be visible. These are stories that need to be heard. And authenticity is just, you can't tell those stories without that authenticity. It's just not possible.
And for most of us, disability is our daily lived experience. So it's not something we pretend to do. And I think, people get Oscars or whatever, but it denies that disability really exists, because they say, oh, Tom Hanks really doesn't have, he's acting. So it denies the authentic experience and the existence of the largest, most intersectional population we have.
I want to add one last thing on that too, for like the acting thing, because I know that's such a big thing too. Like, we have the quote from Scarlett Johansson of like, if I want to be a tree, I should be able to be a tree. And I think some people, especially if you have an acting background, you're like, yeah, sure, maybe that's gold standard. And in 100 years, when we've actually told all the stories authentically, so we know what the true stories are, then yeah, sure, maybe we can all be a tree. I think this is something, again, we talked about Woku at the top, since you guys are both a part of Women of Color Unite, that Cheryl Bedford always says, like, yeah, I have seen lots of stories of white dudes living their white dude lives. So I feel very confident that I could tell that story if I wanted to, because I've seen it portrayed authentically hundreds of times. But nobody has seen a, trans, black, disabled woman tell their story authentically enough times that we're getting the fullness of the representation of what that community and experience is. So you can't have somebody act it, because nobody but that person knows what that is yet, because we're just not there. So there's no reason to think about what could be happening 100 years from now when we can all be trees. But right now, that's not what's happening. We need the authenticity.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. That was so good. And shout out to Cheryl Bedford and Women of Color Unite.
Yes.
I love being a part of them and all the things that they do and are just so amazing. So yeah, everybody check out Women of Color Unite, another great organization that supports just the community as a whole and has really embraced disability in their activism work that they are doing over there. So kudos. So next one is, and I will point this to Kaya, since you are on set right now, which having a accessibility person on set is something that everyone needs to start thinking of, whether the storyline is about disability or not. I think it's a great resource to have. So you don't have to think about, making accommodations for people. There is someone there that is thinking about it top of mind. But my next question is, the disability community is so incredibly diverse, as we've talked about. And are there a few changes to set culture that could make sets more inclusive for the disability community as a whole? I want to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes, as soon as we start saying culture, I'm like, all right, the culture of spaces. Yeah, I think this is something, obviously, it's so interesting being on set now, too, because we're in the midst of everything that's happening with IATSE and recent death within the IATSE community as well, still dealing with the IATSE strike and the possible ratification vote and all of this, that it's not just disability related, that we're seeing that a culture shift needs to happen in the industry, and that culture shift, again, is very much about accessibility. Even though it's not intrinsically about disability, it's about the accessibility of, we need to have time to do our jobs in a safe way. We need to have the time to, actually have the ability to take care of our health while doing the job, all of these sorts of things. So I think specifically related to disability, again, it's all of these sort of minor changes, but I always like to say that flexibility and time are two of like the biggest culture things that we can be aware of. There's lots of sort of gaslighting in the industry of like, if you don't work, if you take even a 5-minute break to go get yourself a glass of water, we're going to fire you because somebody else wants this job more than you. And really thinking about how like unions work because there's a lack of trust between the person being hired and the person doing the hiring, and that the trust is really about who knows how their body works best and how they do their best work. And that the culture shift that needs to happen is that we are trusting that you know how your body works, you know how you do your best work, you want to do your best work. Obviously, everybody who's in this industry, it's a really challenging industry. We're here because we love it and we love the work. So for disabled folks, especially, that's things like giving people the flexibility to go to that doctor's appointment that they have to go to, giving people the flexibility to say, oh, hey, I need a chair in this space that wouldn't normally have a chair. Same thing, having like flexibility of ways that you communicate with people. On our set, we have, sensory objects. And so we have some people who have sensory objects, and we've had to do the culture shift of like, not everybody listens best by like standing, smiling, and nodding and making direct eye contact with you. Some people focus best and are listening to you best when they're playing with their, fidget toy, their sensory object, and are looking off to the side. And that's something that I think people have such set structured ideas about what the right way to do something is, but that right way often completely eliminates the trust that we have in the individual to say, this is what I need and this is how I function. So again, for disability, you're like, great, whether it's autism and you aren't making eye contact with somebody while you're having a conversation with them, or whether it's MS and you are using a walker and you need that to get around the space. All of these things are just saying, the culture needs to trust that people know what they need and people are going to do what they need to do to give their best work in the space. So that time and that flexibility are just huge as far as culture goes.
Yeah. And again, all of those things benefit everyone. Diane, do you have anything to add to this conversation? Especially, I want to hear your perspective as an actor in front of the camera and shifting culture on set.
There's so many, even, I teach at Performing Arts Studio West, which is a program that trains actors primarily development of disabilities. And again, it's shifting. When I talk about normalizing disability, it's like, how do we, to kind of point, what's wrong with having a PA or a production assistant feed lines to a good actor who may have reading challenges? I mean, a lot of the actors I work with have reading challenges. They're great, wonderful actors. So what is wrong? And I think that's where the accessibility training comes in, to continue to shift, because it makes it more inclusive. As you said, big stars get their big trailers and their M&Ms, and you have to cut out the green M&Ms, and no water has to be room temperature or whatever. I mean, they have that in their writers, but they don't necessarily need but want, but yet accessibility, which again is not that big of a deal. And so I think, again, shifting how we think and redefining what normal is, redefining that, expanding that idea of what normal is, creates more inclusion for all of us.
Thank you. And speaking of, more inclusion and shifting culture and things like that, and so say you're an actor and you have a disability and you're on set or something like that, and you need a specific accommodation. So the question to this is, what are some few ways creators can make those accommodations for folks without making the disabled person feel singled out?
That is always, and Kai, you may. I think it's a delicate dance and balance. For me, I think it's asking and having the conversation before the actor arrives on set, and having those conversations. I think it's a lot of self-advocacy too, because because you don't want to make assumptions. So I don't know if there's a perfect answer, but I think the delicate balance between the producers making someone feel comfortable to ask, and sometimes, again, maybe not having that conversation on set, but also not making assumptions. I mean, some people have assumed I can only handle a few words of dialogue, and that's not necessarily true. So it's a delicate balance, but I think it's a doable balance.
Yeah, I'll never forget one time. It was one of the first times I had ever worked on a project where I had like a lot of lines. Very early on in my career, it was a student project, and I'll never forget when I was really struggling in one of the scenes, and I just wasn't getting it just right. And it was the way she handled it as a director was so amazing. It was like she was just like, at lunch, let's just talk. And she pulled me aside and it was like, what's going on? What do you need? What can I do to help you really do well in this scene? And I told her what I needed. It was a private conversation. And then after that, I like nailed that scene. And it was like that simple. And she was like, thank you. And it was just like so easy as that. And the way she handled it, I thought was really great. And it's always a moment that I will always take with me.
And from a director point of view, because I do direct, your job is to create an environment for your actors to succeed in. As a producer, you want to create an environment for the crew and actors to succeed and feel that they're a safe place for success.
Yes, definitely. Kaya, do you have anything to add to this on making sure disabled folks don't feel singled out when needing specific accommodations?
Yeah, so I mean, at least specifically talking about like the PAC, so that production accessibility coordinator role, like I was brought on and I did a crew training. So like everybody learned some stuff about disability, a little bit of disability history, a little bit about how we, acknowledge disability culture in the space, a little bit about how we manage the space to keep it accessible, all of that. And then, I send out a survey that goes to everybody. So the people who I already know are disabled, the people who I don't know, and it essentially says like, is there an accommodation that you need? Is there a disability that you want to disclose? If there is one that you would like to disclose, would you like to disclose it just privately to me and that will stay confidential information? Or do you want this disclosed to everybody on set? Do you want it disclosed just to your department? So all of those things, or again, you can say, I need this in dark mode, but I don't want to disclose an identity. And that's also completely fine. So that really allows us first and foremost to make sure that like we're meeting accessibility needs without making it a thing and without making it a thing where we're singling anybody out individually. It also means that all of those accommodations can be handled before people come to set. So it's not something that, somebody comes up in a wheelchair and there's immediately stairs to get to the door and we're like, oh, what do we do now? And, most of the people in the space don't know what they need to do. So we've already had the training to know what we need to do. And we've already had the conversation to know that that needs to happen before, so-and-so's call time at 7 on Tuesday. So all of that, planning in advance is really great. I think as far as like singling out, all of that stuff again helps as far as having a liaison, having the ability to have things be confidential if people want them to be confidential. Again, visible and invisible disabilities. So sometimes things, are just there and people are like, I use an interpreter, I'm deaf, I'm obviously deaf. So this is a conversation that, I'm going to be having with everybody. But I also think that as far as like directors, producers, what can you do in this space, that building that space where it's okay for everybody to ask for what they need and not just say only the person with the disability is allowed to do something and they get special treatment because of their disability. That's where the singling out comes in, is where then, your crew is unhappy because this person gets to say, I need a 5-minute break, but I don't get a 5-minute break. And so I think that, allowing everybody to ask for what they need also helps that we're not singling out disabled people, because we're recognizing that disabled people aren't the only people who have an awareness of their bodies and their mental state and their needs, and that everybody should have that opportunity.
Yeah, I love that. So definitely doing away with the idea that, someone with disabilities needs are special, and that includes, even being on set. And it's like, I even had this thought, and it's like assuming that everyone is disabled until otherwise, it's just like, and giving those accommodations. So I was like, if we could shift our culture because of thinking that, assuming everyone is disabled until, proven or not proven, but said otherwise. But disabled is not a bad thing.
The term temporarily non-disabled, a lot of disabled groups use that, especially people who are like very social justice disability folks in the space are like, everybody's just temporarily non-disabled. If you don't identify as disabled now, you might break a leg, you might age and lose your hearing, you might, whatever it may be, that those experiences are all things that everybody's just temporarily non-disabled. You're going to cross the space at some point because it's the one truly intersectional space. Everybody can enter it at any point in time. So why don't we just build that into our everyday culture?
And also continue to destigmatize disability, because mental health and disability are still so stigmatized, especially I think people who were not born with a disability, that they have a new life experience. I think if we can continue to work, when people say you're overcoming a disability, I go, no, I'm overcoming the stigmas associated with what the perception of having a disability is. And I think that is something that we're working towards, but we have a long way to go in terms of truly destigmatizing disability.
To that
Nice.
point, I want to jump back in as well, real quick. Sorry, because I use the phrase lose your hearing. And so I'm just going to say deaf gain real quick as well and say, no longer have your hearing, that it's not necessarily a loss. So working with that with my own elderly family now to help them fight their own internalized ableism. Just can't hear anymore. And that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I'm going through the same thing too, with
Me
a family
too.
member, having a, acquiring disability and helping them to unlearn internalized ableism, which in process is also helping me. And, all of it is all a process. So,
yeah, I'm doing it with my dad too. So yeah.
Yeah. So how can emerging creators widen their perspective, including disability community in their stories?
Number one, just write stories and then open the casting to be inclusive. So, I mean, anyone who follows me on Facebook knows like every other post are about my nephews. Because they are the light of my life. They are amazing. Well, why do I post about my nephews? Because I'm an aunt. I'm not a disabled aunt. I mean, yes, I am a disabled aunt, but I post about my nephews because I'm proud of them. I love them. So I think it's writing a story and then it's the Hamilton. It's the Hamilton of being although that does not include actors with visible disabilities that I know of yet, but it's writing the story and then just saying this is who we can call in and be very diverse and intersectional, and who can be the neighbor, who can be the family. Why can't one of the kids in the family of 8 or 4 have a disability and it's just a family show? So that to me is write a good story and then be inclusive about who you want to tell, inclusive and intersectional about who you hire to tell the story that you wrote.
Yes, I love that. And to your point of, and I think this is something that you and I always share when we do panels together. We always talk about all the things that we are, and none of them have to do with our disability. Like, you're an aunt, I'm an aunt, we're daughters, we're best friends, so many things. And it's like none of those things has to do with our disability. So why can't we be considered for roles of things like that that have nothing to do with it? And then also, I think, and I'll add this, but I was like, Kaya, you'll probably say this too. I was like, and I'm probably taking it. But also making sure that folks with disabilities are behind the camera. I think is so important to make sure that you're telling that right when you're having someone disabled tell that story. I think is so important. But Kaya, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think a really easy number to think about is that 25%, right? There were like 25% of adults in the US have a disability. So, and it's 20% when we, add kids in there. So if you have a kids show, you can think about that. But, 1 in 4. So if 25% of the people on your screen don't have a disability, or if 25% of the people behind your camera don't have a disability, then you need to be including some more people with disabilities, because that's what the world looks like. And if you want to represent the world in your stories, then you need to be aware of that number, and you need to be doing your best to find those people. Again, I'm assuming I'm also working, so I may have missed this, that there are abundant resources to find people with disabilities. Respectability, of course, is one of those. If you say, hey, I'm doing a project and I'm looking for some resumes for people for behind the camera or some actors, there are places that you can reach out to. Indivisible Entertainment, my company, is one of those as well, where you can say, hey, I'm looking for somebody who does this and I'm having a hard time finding them. How can I find them? I had a director off of the last panel that we did reach out to me and say, hey, I have a script with this and I'm trying to find a consultant. And I was like, great, let me reach out to some people for you and see who's available. And the first 2 people that I asked weren't. So I said, great, let me reach out to a self-advocacy group that's specific for this disability and see who's available. And I will train them for you, like all of this kind of stuff. So the community is very supportive of the community, and the community wants that like really authentic representation to be there as well. Again, that 25% is a really good number to start with. As a person with an invisible disability, I obviously have a very different experience than Diana and Tatiana as well, because when I was acting, I had the experience of, oh, well, you don't look disabled, so like you can't play this person or that person because I want somebody who's visibly disabled if I'm going to do this. And so I felt like, but this is my experience, and now I can never share my authentic experience because when people look at me, I don't look queer or disabled or whatever. So I think that's something to really recognize too. A lot of my own work with my company and the work that I do as advocacy is about expanding the spectrum. Indivisible's whole thing is deviate from normal. So, queerness and disability are all things that, in the psychology textbooks or in medical textbooks are quantified by how far they deviate from this point that some person in history has decided is normal, and this is what normal people are. And so I think really expanding your idea of what that spectrum is and saying, this character is disabled. As long as I cast somebody who is authentically that, the community is going to recognize it. Like the community is going to see, oh, I can tell, this person is also neurodiverse because I see all of these things as they're embodying this character that I recognize as disabled person. And I think that's something that we really want to see on screen is that whole spectrum of people and everybody doing their authentic story in a way that illuminates that as audience as well, who hasn't heard those stories before.
And also, I think to your point, Kay, usually when I see casting editors, I see someone who uses a wheelchair, and there is nothing wrong with that. We have many people in our community who use wheelchairs, but the diversity of how we show up in the world is so, it's not only people with Down syndrome, we're so diverse. And also another resource where I work, PAStudiowest.com. We have actors with disabilities, so check that out. My website is in there, but PAStudiowest.com is another resource for actors with disabilities.
Thank you. Thank you. So in a minute, we're going to go to Q&A and some questions, but to the point of talking about casting and things like that, and stories. So my question is, what are a few films that you think get it right for the disability community? And what do you think, or how do you feel they achieve that?
Wow. I loved Coda. Now, I think there were some people who had some issues with the fact that the actress was not a Coda, but it had Troy Costner. It had Marley Matlin. It blew me away. I know I've known Troy for years. I was also thrilled for Troy as a friend. But to me, that film was so beautiful. It told a story. Yeah, it was about that, but it wasn't about. It was a culturally specific story that told a universal story about a child leaving home and letting go and all that. And to me, that was one film recently that I thought just blew me away. It was so beautiful, and I really have high hopes for it come award season, that it does really well. I really hope it does.
I have so many.
Go for it.
Even just talking about like deaf representation off the bat, talking about Joey's recent episode of Only Murders in the Building, his sort of like intro episode, the boy in whatever the apartment number is, 8 something, I don't know. That intro episode is so good, and I love that episode so much because when I was watching it, like there's a part where his character is sitting, and obviously the whole thing is done without sound or with very minimal sound, and there's no dialogue, it's all mouthing all of this, and the character is sitting looking at sort of like a metal wall in front of them, and we see the shift of light, and the shift of light is what makes the character realize that like there are people behind him. And that moment was so good because it made me go, oh my gosh, this makes me think about all of my deaf friends who like are always talking about light and their awareness of light that like I as hearing person don't have. So that was such a cool moment. I talked about the witch hunters earlier and like this really cool story about this boy with CP, because again, it's not really about his CP is a part of him and is a part of his authentic journey through life, but it's not what the story is about. And I think that's really great. Same goes for films like The Peanut Butter Falcon. Zach Gottsagen obviously plays such a monumental role in the creation of that film. Yes, Diana with a collapse, like it's such a good film. And one of the things that I love about that film too is that I actually had the opportunity to see it, 3 times. I saw it in, a first screening that was like a disability community screening. And it was so funny because if you've seen the movie, I'm going to spoil a tiny piece of it, but it's at the beginning. So if hopefully this makes you go see it if you haven't seen it, that, he uses like butter to like slide himself out a window. And the disability community screening, people were like on the floor laughing because this is like a hilarious thing that is happening. And then when I saw it in a theater, it was such a different experience because there were people who were like, should I be laughing at this person with Down syndrome? But if you're of the community, you're like, yes, because they're doing something hilarious. So like that this is actively something hilarious that is happening. But the non-disability community was like, can I laugh at this? I don't know. And so I felt like it, again, just that scene alone says so much about what it is. But again, it's another story where the story is not about his disability. He just happens to be disabled. And Zach obviously played a major role in like making sure that story was told authentically and all of that. But I can go on and on, so I won't. But reach out to my email or whatever if people want a list of.
I want to say one thing about the Peter Falcon. I was in Vegas visiting my best friend, and I saw the trailer for that, and I almost cried. I was like, "Oh my god!" I was like, got so excited because I saw the trailer in Vegas, and I went, "Oh my gosh, I cannot wait to see this film."
Yeah. I think for me, and I was like, I know it's not out yet, but I had the privilege of going to the premiere of The Eternals and seeing Lauren Ridloff, who is a Black woman who is deaf playing a superhero, which I thought was so cool. And then her superpower had nothing to do with the fact that she was deaf, which is so awesome. And so being able to see that representation on screen was so great for me as a disabled Black woman to see that on the big screen, especially for a huge property like Marvel, and really shows their commitment to, diversity and disability inclusion. It's so great to see. So when Eternals is out, I really, really highly recommend everyone go see it, and you can see Lauren Ridloff's performance, which was amazing. So we have a question before we wrap up that came in, and it's to an earlier point of talking about universal design. So the person says, can you talk a little bit more about the reasons you see that people give pushback around universal design on set? And I didn't know if any of you could speak to that.
Yeah, I can absolutely jump in on that. I think the reason that there's pushback on anything is because people think it's going to take too much time and it's going to take too much money. So one of the things that I always use in this space, again, is reminding people that it saves you time if you don't have to redesign a space that was designed in an inaccessible way. It saves you time if you end up having an actor that you love who happens to have a disability, and you get stuck between, well, okay, I'm going to have to take the time and money to redesign my set, or I just can't hire this person with a disability. And, we want to avoid those. Well, this is an easy fix. I just won't include anybody who's disabled because it takes time and money. When really, again, we talk about accommodation as being, usually it has no cost. And usually if there is a cost, it's around $50. So it's really not that much. I think the pushback comes because people have no idea what they're talking about. I'm going to be real honest. People have no idea what they're talking about.
And also, when you think about it, if you add a ramp or whatever, how much happier is your crew gonna be not having to log? I mean, I give this a quick example. I was with my friend the other day. We were going to drop her baby off at her apartment, and she carried the stroller up the stairs, and she went, "Oh my gosh, there was a ramp." she's not a woman with a disability, but she was saying if there was a ramp, it would be so much easier for me to carry this stroller up the stairs. So you have ramps, you make your set at universal design. How much easier does the crew will be because they're not having to lug all that heavy equipment around. The benefits
On our set, we
everyone.
just talk about wheels. We
Yeah,
just talk about wheels. We're like, it doesn't matter what the wheel is on. If it's on a camera cart or a prop cart or somebody's wheelchair, it's wheels. You know what helps wheels? Not having cords, not
Everyone.
having bumps, not having stairs. Like there are so many people who use it. So that all that somebody not having to lift a giant cart over, a curb because there's already a ramp there saves you time. The person not getting injured because they threw their back out trying to do that saves you time and money. So again, it's very simply people are pushing back on that because they think it's something completely different than what it actually is.
Yes. And we had this happen. We were consulting, Lauren and I were consulting on a project that featured a young woman in a wheelchair. And we talked about universal design and them, making it accessible on set. And you would not believe the production came back and, said to us, oh my gosh, the fact that we made it accessible from the start made it so much easier everyone, for just everyone. And now this producer is like, oh, I'm going to think about universal design on all my sets. And it's like, yes, that's how it's supposed to be done. So thank you so much. This was such an amazing conversation. I'm so glad I got to have this conversation with both of you, which, we are all friends and, constantly have these conversations among ourselves. So to get to have this for every one of you was great. So we are wrapping up. I want to thank everyone for their thoughtful questions. For you both, Kaya and Diana, for sharing your experiences in this industry. Thank you for all the work that you are all doing. And I am going to turn it back over to Megan to wrap it up for us. And thank you so much.
Yes, I also want to thank our wonderful moderator, Tatiana, and Respectability for bringing us these wonderful panelists, Diana and Kaya, as well as Lauren for speaking on the work that you're doing. And Danny will drop social handles and links in the chat so you can check out more of their work. Thank you to our wonderful ASL interpreter, Gabe Gomez, and the Sign Language Company, as well as our partners in the Cut, Film Shop, LMU, and the Gotham for their support. And thanks to our wonderful audience for watching and engaging at home for this discussion, plus Julie on tech and Danny in the chat. I hope everyone applies the wonderful, brilliant advice shared today to make their stories and productions more inclusive, accessible, and respectful to the disability community. Thank you all and have a great rest of your week, everyone. Bye, everyone.